now we take the effect of rye into the health realm and are looking into the biomarkers and health outcomes. Thank you, Dr. Marjukka Kolehmainen, for being here. And you come to us from Finland, of course, from the University of Eastern Finland in Kuopio, Finland. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the kind invitation. It's really a great honor to be part of the Crane School. I wish that we would have something like this. Maybe this is a good idea to share the opportunity also within Nordic countries. As Kaisa said, that we are collaborating a lot, and this might be something that we would like to pursue together then in the future. So as Nana already kindly told you, I'm going to tell you about the first shortly about the biomarkers, and then going to the health effects and the future directions of what we have found quite recently within rye research. And as my mentor, I just realized that we might have some parts of overlapping, so I have a chance to go very fast then in those parts. Okay, so within nutrition, actually there is quite a lot of discussion at the moment. How could we sort of have more reliable elements when studying the food intake? And this is especially challenging for reporting the whole grain intake, and especially if we want to go really to learn something about the separate grains and their separate health effects, especially in observational studies, epidemiology. It is quite challenging still. And so basically we still lack some precision to really accurately measure the food intake in such, because they are of course more questionnaire based, more self-reporting than relying really on something objective. And if we go to the whole grain, and it was really nicely put by the Professor Kililia in the first presentation, that we have a lot of different kind of products claiming to be whole grain in the commercial ones, and it might be really confusing also for consumers how they should then report for us for their whole grain intake. And this kind of facts may, although we have learned already that whole grains as such are really convincingly related to the many of the health effects, health benefits, and prevent of risk of diseases, but still again it might attenuate the potential associations between whole grain intake and disease outcomes or risk factors. So for that, there are many efforts that trying to find reliable biomarkers for cereal consumption. And of course, these dietary biomarkers then reflect the intake of specific whole grains, even grain fractions, or refined grains. And this is something that we are, or there are many efforts that are currently pursuing to improve this element in nutritional area, researching the health effects of whole grains. But still, we have very few dietary biomarkers that could reliably reflect the specific whole grain intakes. And this is sort of a background for you to understand that it is still quite challenging to really address, for example, if you have many whole grains in your diet, how to dissect the separate effects of various whole grains or even cereals. So it was already both in Professor Kililias and Kaisa's presentations, you both mentioned alkyl-resorcinols, that they are specific biomarkers for whole grain wheat and rye intake. And it has really been lucky one, I would say, that these C17 and C21 that are homologs for alkyl-resorcinols. So their structure is a little bit different, differentiating from each other. So you can really rely on this, that ratio of C17 and C21 homologs. The ratio is close to 1 when there is more whole grain rye in the diet, and then it's close to 0.1 when there is whole grain wheat in the diet. So this is sort of basically one of the most specific biomarkers for whole grain rye. And also its metabolites, various metabolites, they are quite specific, but it suffers from short half-life in plasma. And that's why it's not suitable for studying the effects in populations that have a low or occasional consumption of whole grain rye or whole grain wheat. Then there have been a lot of different efforts to find something else that wouldn't be so sort of rapidly removed from our circulation. And my dear colleague Kati Hanineva, who is also a student to Kaisa, she has done a lot of metabolomics work and benzosaxinoids, she was with her group the one that really associated these compounds to be related the whole grain rye, but it was a sort of a search for that. Now we have a specific and sensitive biomarker for rye, but it appeared that it is also a biomarker for wheat intake. So we really cannot use even this biomarker as a specific for rye. So still we are in search for more biomarkers to be related reliably to rye intake. Just as a comparison, I would like to bring you the biomarkers of whole grain oat intake. Oat has avenantramides and other avenacosides as a specific biomarkers, and they make it quite easy to really study the short to medium term biomarkers, they are short to medium term biomarkers of oat intake. And they are very potential for that purpose because they are unique for oats. And this is something that we would like to have also for rye. And because it is really difficult really to find this kind of populations that these different cereals would have been recorded or ask participant to be recording them while eating. So at this time, the most of the biomarkers for foods are concentration biomarkers, and their accuracy varies quite a lot. So we have still challenges in really find a biomarker that would really reliably take into account the different level of consumption. They would also be sensitive enough also for low consumption of use, and also to take into account also the impact, for example, of different health aspects, individual health aspects, and also the gut microbiota, because as we already heard before, gut microbiota is really active in metabolizing the dietary fiber and whole grains as such. And of course, we would like to have the biomarkers to be also reproducible, so that we could also see that from time after time, these biomarkers would really detect the individual consumption, whether low or high, in whatever occasion. So still we have challenges. There is some problems with these biomarkers. I presented you the most potential one at this time. But for example, now when we are discussing about rye, the alkyl resorcinols seem to be at this time most valid and reliable biomarkers for whole grain wheat and rye, and also independent of the matrices that they are consumed. I would like to show you the bunch of people, scientists that we were working with in this EU-funded food biomarker alliance, where we published a paper a couple of years ago regarding the biomarker cereal food intake, and it was really a challenging job to really find these biomarkers. And I can say that there is really only a handful potential biomarkers for cereal intake. Well, we have heard a lot about this nutritional value of whole grain cereals, but if you see this, that whole grain rye flour contains, of course, a lot of carbohydrate, but it is also, which is rarely noticed, it is also a very good source of proteins, and also such as other whole grain cereals. And as Kaisa showed you, that we are really heavy users of whole grain rye here in Finland. So it produces some 30% of our daily protein intake as a population level. And this is something that we tend to forget as a plant protein source. So we already have in our diet a very familiar source of plant proteins, which of course, which is today, it's very important when we talk about that we should eat more and more plant-based proteins. And here you can see, which is probably very familiar to most of you, is really the Eat Lancet report, where they really address this issue that we should consume more plant proteins. And if you think that whole grains, we should increase their daily intake, and if you compare then to the other protein sources, we should remember that also whole grains really bring to our diet more protein. But of course, as we already heard before, that the protein as such may miss some necessary amino acids. So then we should complement our diet with other protein sources, such as legumes, or then, for example, fish or poultry. And actually, Kaisa already showed these. So factors contributing to health benefits of rye, and also in other previous discussions. But here I would like to show you that the evidence regarding the alkyl resorcinols. So if you think that we did a couple of years ago of intervention regarding the healthy Nordic diet, and it was really based on the so that we wanted to increase also the whole grain rye intake. And if you follow here the plasma alkyl-resorcinol C17 C21 ratio, so you can see that really the participants within the healthy Nordic diet, their alkyl-resorcinol ratio was really showing towards the rye intake. And what we saw was that in all the countries, the 5 Nordic countries were included, and we found that independent of other possible benefits, this whole grain rye intake was associated with increased insulin sensitivity, but also improved lipid profile. So this really showed that whole grain rye was the behind of these effects. And Kaisa also showed you that if you compare rye and wheat, you find that glucose levels are really the similar, but what is then a benefit, is recorded as a benefit, is the insulin economy. So insulin levels are not, insulin is not needed as much as after eating wheat. And what we have detected in our studies some years ago already, that if a population that already have some glucose disturbances, they have, for example, impaired glucose tolerance. So in this kind of population, when their diet is rich in whole grain rye, the first phase insulin response is sort of a reversing back to the health benefits. So in this kind of population, when we have insulin curve after eating is 2-phase. So the first phase of insulin secretion is sort of blunted in this kind of population. But when they are eating diet rich in rye, this first phase insulin response is recovering. So this was really shown in our diet. Another issue is that when you eat this kind of diet, you can see that the glucose levels after oral glucose tolerance test, you can see that the glucose levels after diet, 12 weeks of consuming diet rich in rye, the glucose levels are decreasing, which is of course very good in this kind of population having already disturbed glucose metabolism. In addition, we can see the inflammatory response is decreasing during this kind of diet. So we have been hypothesizing after these studies that this level of this improvement in insulin economy is also then reflected long term in improvement in low-grade inflammation, which is related to the development of chronic diseases, but also the improvement in glucose metabolism. Well, then a couple of words before finalizing. I would like to show you the latest findings that we have seen. So as we have heard already many times, that this kind of grain-rich diet, it of course improves the function of gastrointestinal tract, and it has an effect on the gut microbiota. It increases the diversity and the composition of gut microbiota towards the maintenance of healthy gut microbiota. Of course, today we cannot say what is healthy and what is non-healthy gut microbiota, but there are certain evidence that shows towards that. And we have been very interested also the gut barrier function, how this gut microbiota is related to gut barrier function and permeability. And what we have found is in our earlier study where our participants were consuming this kind of a diet which was rich in whole grain rye, or then bioprocessed rye bran included in white wheat bread. We had a similar findings regarding the insulin economy, but also we saw that whole grain rye produced more short chain fatty acids by the gut microbiota, which is regarded as a health effect, because we know that the higher the level of the short chain fatty acid, the more is the benefit towards the health effects. But what is really interesting is that we found that within this particular study, when the population were eating whole grain rye, their peripheral gut produced serotonin levels were decreasing. And now I have to say that a peripheral serotonin has been associated with towards the risk of the development of chronic diseases, and this is now inverse for the central serotonin levels. So pay attention to this. So peripheral serotonin is linked with the increased risk of chronic diseases. And this was really surprise to us that while eating a whole grain rye, these peripheral levels of serotonin, they were decreasing in this population. And this was also seen in gut barrier. So in this part is mice study where it was studied, and here we saw that in colon, so large intestine, when the mice were eating either rye bran, so rye bran, or wheat aleurone fraction, so wheat bran, their serotonin production was decreasing, so that peripheral circulation also contained a lower amount of serotonin. So this was really interesting, and we did a further study about what is ongoing then when we feed mice with really a diet rich in rye bran, and we could show that the certain bacteria genera that is regarded as a health effect, bifidobacterium, their abundance was increased. And then we also showed with the rye bran fraction that there was increased amount of bile acids in feces of these mice, which really improved the systemic bile acid and cholesterol metabolism. And they also showed that the serotonin metabolism was decreasing. So we could really show the mechanism towards this, that it was really a rye bran related effect. So to the future directions, and this is my final slide. So future directions are really going for more in detail, though, what is really the interaction of this rye bran or whole grain rye and its effect on gut microbiota as producing or mediating the health effects in human metabolism, and how gut microbiota is producing various metabolites from rye by fermenting rye in the colon, and what are the health effects, and how these metabolites or this gut microbiota is then related, and or how it is mediating really the gut barrier integrity and lowering the inflammation already in gut barrier which then leads to the decrease of inflammation, systemic inflammation also. And what I would like to lastly address is really that we have a huge potential in food processing to producing different effects, and what we are currently studying is really that how these different processing methodologies, how they have an effect on our health, and what kind of differences we could have by using various technologies in food processing, and if there could be, for example, some groups of population that are more sensitive to certain kind of whole grain products, and the other population groups would be more sensitive and have more benefit to other kind of whole grain products. And the fermentation is really part of the key variable here, what we are pursuing.